Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're breaking down a massive shockwave that's currently ripping through the global artificial intelligence landscape. You know, if you've been following these frontier models, you already know things move insanely fast. But what just happened? It isn't just a regular update or a step forward, it is a complete paradigm shift. We are literally watching a fundamental rewrite of the rules of compute, open source capabilities, and hardware limitations happening right before our eyes. To really grasp the sheer magnitude of what's going down, tech visionary Peter H. Diamandis hit the nail on the head. He said, America just experienced an AI Sputnik moment. Think about that for a second. A Sputnik moment. It implies a sudden, totally unexpected leap by a competitor that forces everyone else to just scramble and accelerate their own efforts. And honestly, looking at the data, that is exactly what just happened. So here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll cover that AI Sputnik moment. Then step 2, shattering the compute wall. Third, we'll dive into the open source free-for-all. Fourth, superintelligence on smartphones. And finally, number 5, the future of AI forecasting. All right, let's jump right in.
Section 1. The AI Sputnik moment. The exact catalyst for this crazy shift we're seeing was the overnight release of a truly monstrous new model from a Chinese lab called Moonshot AI. They call it Kimmy K3, and guys, it didn't just quietly enter the market, it completely kicked the door off its hinges.
Up until literally just a minute ago, the cutting edge of AI was basically a very tight American duopoly. If you wanted the absolute best, well, you went to OpenAI or Anthropic. But today, we are suddenly standing in the middle of a chaotic, global free-for-all. You've got Meta and xAI pushing the limits over here, and now Moonshot AI has planted its flag right at the absolute peak of global performance. The old world is just gone.
2.8 trillion. Just let that number sink in. That is the staggering number of parameters packed inside Kimmy K3. It just dropped out of nowhere as the largest open-weight model ever created. It is an absolute monster. But, you know, size alone doesn't tell the whole story, right? It's all about what this beast can actually do.
Kimmy K3 didn't just close the gap with the competition, it practically jumped the fence. It vaulted 17 places up from previous versions to completely dethrone the top American models in the front-end coding arena. Plus, it grabbed the #1 spot in data analytics, consumer products, and content creation. And because it's a true multimodal model, its ability to understand and process complex reasoning tasks is just staggering.
Section 2. Shattering the compute wall. Now, you're probably sitting there wondering, how on earth was this even achieved? Moonshot AI developers were operating under some extremely strict US export controls, embargoes explicitly designed to starve them of the most advanced NVIDIA chips, like those highly coveted Blackwells and H100s. So, how do you build a 2.8 trillion parameter behemoth without the absolute best hardware?
Well, it turns out those embargoes inadvertently forced some massive algorithmic efficiencies. Driven by sheer necessity, these developers practically engineered their way right around the compute wall. They use things called muon optimizers, which are essentially brilliant mathematical shortcuts that let you train models way faster. They also vastly simplified their training data. So instead of just dumping the entire internet, including all the useless garbage like pop concert schedules into the model, they hyper-curated high-signal data. And on top of that, they aggressively optimized their software to run on older alternative silicon from Huawei and Alibaba. It's fascinating, really. The constraints actually bred vastly superior engineering.
So here is the absolutely crucial takeaway. By utilizing all these new efficiencies, stripping out the garbage data and optimizing the algorithms, these massive models can now be trained for roughly 1% of the cost of those original multi-billion-dollar titans. 1%! The secret formula for frontier intelligence is officially out in the wild, and it turns out it's exponentially cheaper than anyone ever thought possible.
Section 3, the open source free-for-all. This massive plunge in costs transitions us perfectly into our next massive paradigm shift, making these models accessible to the general public and everyday enterprises.
Because model weights are being released completely openly now, the shelf life of being at the absolute cutting edge is no longer measured in years. Honestly, it's barely measured in weeks. Frontier intelligence is now a totally perishable asset. Think about it. If you're an enterprise, you barely have enough time to evaluate a model, write up an RFP, and run it past your internal committees before you are suddenly 3 generations behind. It's wild.
The pace of these frontier model releases is just compounding exponentially. Back in early 2024, we saw a major release maybe once every 60 days. Then it sped up to every 50 days. Recently, we've hit an average of 1 release every 10 days. If you regress this exponential curve out, it practically drives us toward a reality of near-continuous daily frontier model updates by this coming January. We are literally entering an era of continuous versioning. For enterprises and governments, this creates a clear roadmap to take total control of their own destiny. Instead of throwing all your sensitive, proprietary data over the wall to an external API and risking your intellectual property, you can just take an open-weight model like Kimmy K3, run it entirely on-premise, and fine-tune it in-house. It completely shatters vendor lock-in and drastically drops your API dependency. Basically, every single company now has the tools to become its own highly specialized AI lab.
Section 4. Superintelligence on smartphones. All right, let's take a telescope to microscope pivot here. Let's look at how all this macro-level intelligence is being shrunk down to fit right onto the smartphone sitting in your pocket. Okay, let's really dive into this one. To understand how this works, we have to talk about quantization. It's basically the technical magic that drastically shrinks these colossal AI brains down to a manageable size. Normally, standard models run their math on 16-bit or 8-bit numbers, but researchers figured out ways to reduce the precision of these weights while somehow retaining the model's fundamental intelligence. By methodically compressing the data down from 16-bit to 8-bit and all the way down to ternary, which by the way is just 3 values like 1, 0, and -1, or even binary formats, developers can vastly reduce the memory requirements. And here is the absolute kicker. Multiplying numbers by a 1 or a 0 is computationally incredibly cheap. So this compression doesn't just save space, it actually increases processing speed by up to 5 times, even on way less powerful chips. Which leads us directly to breakthroughs like Prism ML's Bonsai model. Through some extremely aggressive quantization, they've effectively managed to put a 27 billion parameter, super intelligent, locally running AI directly onto a standard smartphone. And get this, it uses only 6 gigabytes of RAM. Think about that for a second. You basically have a 120 IQ entity sitting right there in your pocket. It requires absolutely zero internet connection, and it responds almost instantaneously. Every vehicle, every robot, and every phone is about to have its own localized, persistent frontier intelligence. Section 5. The future of AI forecasting. Which brings us right to our final section. What exactly happens when we combine infinite, dirt-cheap edge computing with frontier-level intelligence? We are officially entering the realm of hyper-forecasting. What happens when AI predicts the future better than we do? It's a huge question, because if intelligence continues to exponentially self-improve, its ability to model highly complex systems, like global economics or even human sociology, will inevitably surpass our own human capabilities. We actually measure this on a platform called the Forecast Bench, and recent data from there shows that models like Cassie, which was actually built by a British intelligence officer, are now statistically indistinguishable from the world's most elite human super forecasters. We're talking about the kind of people who regularly outpredict CIA analysts. But here's the difference. Unlike those humans, the AI doesn't need to sleep. It reads absolutely everything, it processes data continuously, and it's practically free to run. What this all means is that every major decision you make could soon be guided by a tireless, superhuman advisor. We are talking about capital markets being dominated by auto trading, where AI anticipates human reactions before the humans even make them. We're looking at automating senior management decisions because an AI can track sprawling global supply chains without any of our human biases. But it trickles all the way down to the individual too. Imagine having a highly personalized lifestyle coach that gently nudges you away from bad consumer choices, like buying stuff you really don't need, or politely suggests you put down the donut and get off the couch, continuously simulating your absolute optimal path to health and happiness. Ultimately, attempting to strictly embargo or constrain this technology has proven totally impossible. You just can't put the genie back in the bottle. We've witnessed an evolution from biological intelligence to collective network intelligence, and now we're stepping into the age of artificial superintelligence. Much like information on the early days of the internet, intelligence fundamentally wants to be free. It wants to be abundant, and it wants to be accessible to everyone. With this unprecedented, almost godlike power now available to literally anyone with a smartphone, the barrier to entry has completely vanished. You don't need to own a massive data center anymore. You don't need $1 billion in funding. Honestly, you just need a purpose. Which leaves us with this final thrilling question to consider as we wrap up this explainer. What will you build now that intelligence is infinite and free? Thank you so much for joining me today, and as always, stay curious.